thank you guys for coming again. So next week we'll talk at the end about what we're going to do next week, but hopefully we have a few of these webinars lined up for things that we've identified as being important. So the first one was, if you missed it, you can always find it on YouTube. We have the links lying around somewhere. But the first one was all on chemical signaling and kind of how CBD works from a macro perspective. And today I thought we could jump into some CBD regulation and claims. And the way that I wanted to kind of do this is laid out by the history of hemp, which is what CBD is derived from. It's from hemp. And talk about the legality in this country specifically. And then go through the FDA's perspective. And then from there, kind of what we can say as a claim from the FDA's point of view. And then I wanted to zoom out and go globally and look at the World Health Organization summit that happened in 2017. So, and then basically from there, just talk about where we are legally with marijuana as a whole. So as marijuana legislation moves forward, it seems like CBD legislation kind of follows shortly behind that. And then a little bit about like where the future CBD support's coming from a research point of view, and then just from legislation and different legislations that's hit the books in the 2018. And at the end, if you guys want to, you can unmute your mics and everything and try and ask some questions with me. If you want to just stay after, let me know. If not, you can just sign off, and that'll be your answer of if you wanted to stay and ask questions. But let's get started then. So the history of hemp. It's got a very robust history all the way back to 8,000 BC. So if you're counting at home, that's 10,000 years ago, about. And then the consumption of marijuana, or hemp, has been dated back to 400 AD, where they actually found trace amounts of THC in the ashes of some preserved ashes. So the reason I want to highlight that is that this has a pretty long history of medicine that's been used by humans. So that sort of potential of being around a long time, it kind of synchronizes with our idea of how this is different than synthetic treatments. So this is such an old compound that we're almost co-evolving alongside it as a human species. So it's not something that was introduced in the 90s or the 2000s. It's not a brand new compound that we're introducing to our body. It's something that our ancestors have interacted with, in theory, for thousands of years. So the fact that there's no side effects that we see, maybe this can help explain that, just being around for as long as it is. So down below, and let me go back to the first slide. So if you look here, there's a hemp plant on the left and on the right. Our hemp plants tend to be more on the ones on the right than the ones on the left. And I actually just went through this today with Marcus. The stuff from Iceland or stuff that's from Denmark or the Netherlands, it's going to be taller plants, and the stuff that we get from Colorado is a shorter plant, so more of the flower is on it, and it has less of a stalk. So if you look here, this is more typical to some sort of the hemp that we would be harvesting in Colorado, where we get our product from. So the basic principles of extraction I was going to go over in another webinar specifically, but the idea here is you take this plant material and it's really, really rich in its flowers, so you actually get a lot higher amount of CBD during the extraction process than if it's a big, long, tall stem. Not to say that doesn't have its own value, but when you're talking just from a CBD perspective, the more concentrated the flower, the more CBD you can get out. So in America specifically, we've kind of been one of the pioneers of hemp in the world view. And hemp was used as fiber, as clothing, as food. The fibers were broke down to create paper. It's been used as medicine. I read an article on how it was used as truth serum. I thought that was interesting, that people would have thought that. It's an interesting thought, but obviously nothing has any validity. It's used as building materials. They use it as fuels now, as biofuels, a lot of nanocomposites. And the reason that they use this stuff for basically anything is it's very, very resilient, and it's extremely easy to harvest. And these sort of principles of it can withstand super amounts of heat, various amounts of humidity, different soil conditions, and these kind of lend itself to American farmers who have pretty much figured out in every single state ways to harvest this stuff. And it was such a big part of our history. It's interesting to show, and I'll show you in a few slides later, how it's kind of coming back in to the fold after legislation has kind of allowed it to. But again, CBD has a big, long history in our country, even before it's, all the way back to 1611. So let's look at this timeline again. So this is just kind of broadly about hemp and marijuana in general. But I'd like to point your direction over here to 1850. So the cannabis added to the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. So basically what this is kind of a document, a catalog of lists of medical compounds or medical, like basic medicines that have been approved by the U.S. as having medicinal purpose. So you can see in 1850 we added it, and all the way down to 1937 we basically made it illegal. So in a quick span, and before that was when it was really hitting its peak in the U.S. And so in 1918 the U.S. kind of led the way. And then 1937 it goes away. We see it kind of die out. And then 1992, what happens? Well, actually in 1970 it becomes completely illegal to grow it in the U.S. because they misconstrued it as being so close to marijuana, and the THC component hadn't been clearly identified. So they just basically said no more hemp in the entire U.S. So the industry dies. And in 1992, the endocannabinoid system was actually discovered for the first time. So once that discovery happened, a lot of people started to say, hey, okay, now we can watch what happens when each one of these cannabinoids interacts. We can start to elucidate and start to decide which compounds matter for the psychoactive behavior, which ones don't matter, and which ones have therapeutic validity. So in 1992, that kind of blew the doors off for all this legislation. And it isn't until, obviously, governments move slowly and legislation changes all the time. But in 2014, after more and more states started to become marijuana legal from a recreation and medicinal standpoint, 2014 really, that began when everybody could legally sell CBD, as long as it was derived from a hemp-derived plant. So this is kind of the big turning point in the CBD industry, the hemp industry. So now we start to see this huge sort of revolution back to that time period when we did say it was valid and we were growing it like crazy in the U.S. To me, it kind of speaks to that same sort of time period here. And the World Anti-Doping Association decides that it can no longer be prohibited. And as it stands right now, the count that I just pulled off today, 34 states have an industrial hemp farming program. So that basically just means it's supported from a state legislation standpoint that you can grow hemp as long as it's regulated and you do all your testing and you make sure that it's 0.3% THC, less than 0.3% THC. So it's kind of an interesting guideline. You can see like that 1992 discovery really does translate into legislation down the pipeline. So at least there's some hope in that side of things where the research now is strong enough to kind of support legislation. So that's the history of hemp. And now let's talk about what the FDA does and how it tries to function. It's kind of a clunky system, the FDA. But I wanted to take a look real quick at a specific document on something that I've done research for in the past. And I just want you to kind of see what happens when a drug gets approved by the FDA. So I'm going to come out here and show you this. So this is a basic drug called BCM95 from a biotech company that all it really is it's just a turmeric extract. but they encapsulate it and they try to get it all quantified by the FDA. So you can see what happens after the FDA approves this, which this drug has been approved by the FDA. You get to see all of these different studies here. So there's manufacturing processes that are here that they kind of gloss over, and some boring sort of stuff. But as you get down here, we can start to see here is all of the research that is associated with turmeric from the FDA's perspective based on human trials. So what you get is once a drug is approved, this goes out on, this is from the FDA's website. You guys can look this up too. But you start to see these joint health discussions, mood and depression discussions. And if you go down to those pages, you can see a nice sort of study on all of these thoughts based on how the FDA is looking at this compound. So these are all studies that kind of get chopped up, and the important sort of points are diagnosed by the FDA, and then they report it on their own website. Sorry. Gonna go in and mute this real quick. Okay, we're good. So once the FDA actually gets it, they become a sort of ally to us. So I kind of want that to be understood. The FDA is definitely trying to do their job. They're trying to make sure that the drug is safe. But then after they get an approved drug, we get access to all of these amazing studies. So this is on prostate cancer and turmeric, and it talks about how it actually helped in this 600 male 6-month study to reduce the occurrence of prostate cancer. And so you just kind of get this huge wealth of knowledge on human trials after all this stuff is done. So that's kind of where we are with CBD at this point. We are kind of following the trail of what the FDA provides for us at this point. Before we say anything about a product, we have to make sure that it's within the guidelines of the FDA. Because at any point, the FDA can issue a letter of warning saying that our claims are out of line with their perspective on the drug, and then we can basically get shut down at that point. Your store individually, your Facebook page, you guys have run into all of this. So the main body that implies the risk is the FDA. Facebook and places like that are trying to make sure that they're within those guidelines too. So everyone's just being hyper cautious based on what the FDA is saying. And as more and more of the CBD stuff gets patented, we start to get more and more access to the product. So again, like GW Pharmaceuticals, they're a company I'm going to talk about briefly. Once they approve a CBD product, then we get to say new things and new adjectives and the power behind them. But if they do, if the FDA does approve a CBD cancer product, that doesn't mean that we can say the word CBD cures cancer. What we could say is that this drug has been shown to reduce cancer in these certain situations, and the main component of the drug is CBD. Do you understand the slight difference there? But here's another example of just kind of what the FDA is trying to do and how it's kind of been misconstrued as being very negative. There's been examples where there was a cancer drug that was helping people, and the FDA spent over 13 years trying to campaign against the doctor in charge of this, and turns out the FDA was wrong, and they admitted that they were wrong, and they went out and they paid all their stuff. So the fact that the FDA does show this sort of learning mechanism and understanding and has slowly started to incorporate CBD products and marijuana-derived products means that we're trending in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to do. And it's still a gray area where the FDA has these products and has these different companies coming out with CBD derived products, but they aren't really saying one way or the other. So we have to kind of rely on being very cautious with our verbiage and using what information they provide and directly using it for that. So the other thing I wanted to show you here is there's a U.S. patent here that I just found today as well. And it's the World Health Organization No, it's not. It's the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They actually own this patent that shows that cannabinoids could be an antioxidant and neuroprotectant in such diseases as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and dementia. This has been owned by them since 1999. So it's not as though the FDA or the U.S. Department of Health isn't aware of the possibility of CBD being this giant, neuroprotector, could be a key to unlock Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and help neurological disorders and help actually prevent it, not treat it, as a neuroprotectant. They've been holding on this information since 1999. So there's also that sort of component to it that I wanted to kind of discuss with you, because it's not as though they're not on board with the possibility of it. It's more that they are trying to be very careful with their words, and they're kind of weeding it out until legislation breaks one way or the other. They definitely don't want to be on the side where they're having to admit that they said something incorrectly. So that being said, there's kind of 3 words that you absolutely cannot say about CBD or any sort of drug without it being approved by the FDA for clinical trial. So here are 4 CBD companies that have all been sent letters because they incorrectly did this. So all of these companies said that CBD cured cancer. Each one of those companies said that in a claim at some point. So they didn't get fined. There's been no fines issued in this space yet. But they have gotten letters basically saying, we are going to shut you down unless you remove all this language from this and correct what you've done. So can't say the word cure, you can't say the word treat or prevents, and you can't diagnose anything because we're not doctors. What we're trying to do is provide a solution to a medical problem, and we're trying to have it as a support system. If it works completely for one person, of course, you're going to continue to sell to that person and they're going to be very happy. If it doesn't work for another person, then you can explain, it doesn't work on everybody's body type. Everybody's got different drugs that they're taking, and you could have a competition there between your drugs that you're taking. So here's an example of an article on depression and diabetes here. We can't just say CBD cures diabetes and it helps cure depression, but you can say that CBD, and using this article as sort of information, CBD in this specific diabetic rat situation where they have actually impregnated the rat with diabetes, it's shown to reverse depression-like behaviors. And then you can look at the numbers and actually go through how much it actually helped. So this right here is from August 2016. This could pave the way to future human trials where they actually can do that, and then we could directly say in this specific case of diabetic disorder, it can help depressive-like behavior. But you can't just go out and say it flatly, that it cures depression, that it treats depression or prevents. So those are the words that you can't say. And here's a good example here. Our water-soluble CBD cures and treats various types of depressions that are linked with people with diabetes. So that would never be said by us at this point. Here's another good example. So this is the bad example. This is the good example. This preliminary study found here, so that I link to the study here, shows the possible benefits of using CBD to target a specific type of depression associated with diabetes. Although this sounds clunky and is maybe not as powerful, this is what we want to steer our customers toward. We want them to read this study if they want to, and if they have a similar situation, try CBD and see if it works. If it does work, then they forever can feel the benefits of CBD, but then we don't get shut down by the FDA. You see the difference. One is a bold statement that could lure somebody into thinking that they could be cured 100% of the time, while this gives you a bunch of qualifiers and points them to the direction of the research that's behind it. So we want the power of the research behind our claims. We don't want to just use these crutch words and try and mislead a consumer into thinking one way or the other. We want them to make an informed decision. So again, here's another claim example where these people also got a letter sent to them from the FDA. So they even were using something that has been run by the FDA. This is a Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is that rare seizure that has been regulated, and GW Pharmaceuticals produced this compound, and it's been used to cure, and it actually does cure this rare type of it's a rare type of seizure. So, but what these guys got in trouble for is at no point do they actually say that the other company is the one that produced the product. They're claiming it as if they made the compound. So even in this situation, if somebody does come to you with this rare seizure form, you can't say that our CBD cures it. You can say that CBD has been shown to cure it, and this was the formula, and we think that ours is pretty close to that, so you should try it. That's a much better way to do it than saying all of these numbers out here, because this is going to get you in trouble if you say 100% elimination of seizures over a 4-month period. Where do those numbers come from, right? Where is this data coming from? Well, it's all coming from that FDA trial, but there's no reference to it. So these guys got hit with a letter. So, like I said, there's been no company who's actually been fined. It's been warning letters, but those warning letters are something that eventually turn into fines. And like I said, CBD's as new as 2014. We could find out tomorrow that a bunch of big companies are getting hit with this stuff because they're not looking out for these claims. So from our perspective as a company, we want to develop our own internal standards and our own understanding of the FDA's perspective and the World Health perspective. And we want to internally make sure that everybody's doing this, everyone's following this, so that at the point when legislation breaks and everyone's scrambling to try and align themselves with the legislation, we've already done that from an internal perspective. We've already policed that in-house. And then we don't have to deal with sort of the cleanup stages that all the other companies are going to have to do once there's like exact guidelines of what you can say and what you can't say. So that's just kind of the last example for the FDA. So that's all, U.S.-driven legislation. So let's talk about the World Health Organization. So they're a global entity that assesses public risk. They assess potency of a product, and they talk about addiction dependencies. So the big news that came from their 2017 summit, and it's a pre-review report. So basically what that means is they put it on the table and see if there's any legitimacy to it, and then in the following years they can decide to have a full review on the product. So they just blanket went over CBD in general. And I have if you guys want this document, I have this too. It's a PDF. It's a pretty compelling read, but I'll show you some of the summaries about it. But the basic summary was there is no addiction dependency. That was a huge sort of revelation for a lot of people. This is not like marijuana. This is not like alcohol. This is not like those other drugs that can somehow be associated with pain relief, but it doesn't have any side effects and it doesn't have any addiction dependencies. So that's a huge boon for us. We can actually say the World Health Organization has said that there's no addiction dependencies. We can flatly say that from this report. They go over 2 to 3 products. The reason I say 2 to 3 because they're actually talking about a product that does get pushed ahead in 2018, so it's kind of like not really described fully there. But they go over them and they talk about how they demonstrate efficacy for human trials, and they do confirm that the GW pharmaceutical product that uses CBD to completely cure seizures of rare, and they were called treatment-resistant seizures, so that's been decades of synthetics that have been trying to target this, and they've been completely resistant, and CBD goes in and completely gets rid of any of the tremors that happen from these 2 rare forms of seizures, the Dravet and the Lennox-Gastaut seizures syndromes. So this is a big deal that the World Health Organization goes in and they say, yep, we agree. Everything from that trial looks great. So we can just kind of move forward and take that stuff as being a really well done, well laid out study and trial. So the other conclusion they have, though, all things like this have kind of 2 sides. The World Health Organization says, of course, we need a lot more university-funded or other third-party peer-reviewed trials to be done on humans before we can keep saying more about this. But that being said, they do go over a number of studies that have been done in mice, and they kind of lay out all of these different studies based on these diseases here. And these are some of the things that we say to our customers, right? That it can help target depression symptoms. It can help maybe with Parkinson's and all that stuff, MS. These are a lot of neurological things up here. So right here, what I'd like to do is kind of provide this stuff for you guys and show the research that's tied to this, and then you can kind of keep this in the store. And if somebody has somebody comes in with MS and they want to they're at their wits' end, they want to try CBD, you can show them this article on how it can help the anti-inflammatory parts of the neurological network, and how that could potentially help regrow the myelin sheath and help to combat the symptoms of MS. And I've been actually working personally with a MS patient in California who just got diagnosed about 4 months ago, and his doctors are completely blown away with his new regimen of a diet. He completely changed his diet, and then he's been on CBD and other natural remedies, and he's found complete reduction in actually loss of symptoms. And he was saying to me we were kind of collaborating back and forth as to the mechanism why that's happening, and we're hopefully going to try and publish a paper at some point together, just discussing his regimen and how it worked for him. But this is straight from the World Health Organization, an overview of diseases and targeted, understandings of how CBD has gone in and potentially helped this situation. So this is a really powerful document, and I'd like to kind of provide this in a digestible form for you guys if you guys are interested in that. But here's another kind of snippet from this World Health Organization document. Another possible therapeutic application which has been investigated is the use of CBD to treat drug addiction. So I thought this was really important because we've been talking about getting people off opioids and all that, and even in marijuana users, it's been shown that CBD could potentially be a therapeutic relief for that. So this helps with opioids, cocaine, and other psychostimulants. The fact that the World Health Organization is openly going out and saying that in their review, where they have a bunch of scientists all sitting around in a round table discussing what's the science community's perspective. The fact that they've gone in and identified this, and we've already started to think about that, I think that's a good avenue, and that's where we want to be as a company, is trying to align ourselves with the science community as a whole, and try and think about products that can help people that are addicted to opioids, that are addicted to tobacco and cannabis. Any sort of natural remedy that we can provide and actually have some science behind it, that's really powerful at this point. And there's not a lot of CBD companies that have really tried to do this and really openly talked about it. And just since I've been here over the last few weeks, it's been something that we've talked about quite a bit. And store owners have talked to me about that quite a bit as well. So this is a really interesting finding from this meeting. So again, the last sort of thing I want to touch on from that document and that meeting in 2017 is the legislation for legal CBD is kind of different between each country has its own perspective for it. So in the U.S. and other parts of Europe, it's the less than 0.3% THC by weight, and that's all coming from the Farm Bill in 2018. And we'll go over that a little bit more in a second. And then I thought this was interesting. New Zealand and Australia, they define legal CBD as 2% or less of the other cannabinoids, and that's not including CBD, just THC. They actually think that the CBC, the CBN, and the CBG, that those can't be too high either, because those are part of the marijuana plant, and the more of the marijuana plant you have, then the more marijuana effects you have, and the more pure CBD you have, then the safer it is. We know that's not true. So in the U.S., I actually really appreciate that this is actually the more progressive stance, is to say that the THC, the psychoactive component, is the only part that we should target. And the more therapeutic benefit can actually be had in this circumstance than in this circumstance. So kind of sort of a American pride thing here that's our perspective in that front, and we're not kind of closed off, because this lends itself to isolates running rampant, and we know that isolates are just inferior to full spec or broad spec. So, but either way you look at it, these numbers are all done by legitimate third-party testing, and that's something that's all we're really doing right now, is we're trying to figure out what's the best product and what gets tested perfectly, and what are the companies representing as their CBD, and then what is it actually. So we run all third-party testing before and after, when we're blending, before, when we have a final product, after. So these are sort of the staples of what makes a good CBD company, because as things start to move forward with legislation, you may only be able to be in business if you are doing legitimate third-party testing. And we seek out reputable labs too, so we're vetting our labs that are testing it. So these are all decisions and questions that we've already started to answer before it breaks fully open, and it's just a competition of who can get the best third-party testing, who has the best sort of perspective on claims and all that. So we're kind of setting ourselves up early on this front. So finally, this is GW Pharmaceutical, the company that created the CBD-derived seizure drug. And like I said before, it's kind of ironic. We're trying to make sure we're within the guidelines of the FDA, but once it does get it approved, right, then we bounce back to this turmeric sort of document, and now we have this human trial kind of feast of data, where we can just kind of go through and understand what are the key components here, what are the mechanistic perspectives at play, where has all this research been conducted, and who's done it. And in some cases, you can go look at all of the references. And sometimes I like to reach out and email the professors directly and talk about their perspective. Years later, what do they think? So, I mean, some of these studies have been done 7 or 8 years ago, and untouched since then. So basically, once the drug becomes FDA approved, the World Health Organization and the FDA then kind of have a public opinion on it too, and we kind of take all of that in, digest it, and then we can spit it back out to you guys and give you guys the power of what to say to a customer when they come and approach you at a certain question, and what to put on a sign, what to put on a social media post. But that all kind of gets helped out when the FDA goes and approves a drug in a weird way. It's kind of something that at first I was hesitant to follow this trail, but once I started to see the FDA's guidelines and their studies, you can start to just kind of use that as a goldmine of information, and it kind of helps the whole process along. So with that being said, the marijuana legal states. So like I said, legislation sort of follows this kind of indirectly, but CBD in states where it's medical marijuana, it's a lot easier to procure it. It's a lot easier to sell it in those states because the legislation's already in place for medical. So here's the map that we see right now. In just a few months, there's going to be 2 states voting on recreational use, Michigan and North Dakota, and then 2 states, Utah and Missouri, paving the way for medical. So Michigan is fairly, I believe they're fairly old when it comes to how long they've been medical, and North Dakota is fairly new to medical, or it's one way or the other. But so one of these is a quick turnaround. So the way that it kind of works is once medical is approved, it's pretty quick after that recreational at least gets voted on, or in some forms. But that's not directly the case in Florida, which is complicated, obviously, as you guys probably know more than me. But once you get that recreational use, then CBD is easy. It's very much so easy to set up a farming infrastructure in those states and that sort of thing. So it's important to kind of follow this a little bit, the marijuana legalization, because then the CBD in that in those places are a lot easier to understand. So the Farm Bill of 2018 had one amendment to it that affected CBD. So basically what it says is that if you farm something that's 0.3% THC and it's from hemp, then it basically becomes less than the Schedule 1 that we've seen before. So what this basically said to us was, as long as you're doing industrial hemp and as long as you're 0.3% THC, you can ship it, it's legal, and you can do it in any state that supports that. So each state still has to support that legislation, but this is the 2018 Farm Bill, and this is a new addition, which is going in the right direction, which basically specifically says if you use industrial hemp and all your numbers look right, you can then go ahead, and it's a lot easier to get that license, to get that farm going. And again, each state will change that dependency a little bit, but this is just to highlight sort of 2018, we're getting closer and closer to understanding that, yes, industrial hemp is different than a cannabis plant. And there was an amendment proposed by Mitch McConnell, and Mitch McConnell, I think, is an important one to note because he is a conservative Republican, and he is supporting this because of how much Kentucky is benefiting financially from this legislation. So he's on board from a money-making standpoint, and he understands the complexity here where THC is not involved, so there's no psychoactive behavior. So he's trying to support farms, he's trying to support, Tennessee business, and the fact that he went in and put an amendment in means that there is legislative support from both sides of Republican and Democrat. So that really matters because if there's support on both sides, then what starts to happen is public education starts to happen, and people understand this, and they're voting for these things. And the other great thing you can do is call representative. If you're from Alabama, if you're from Ohio, other states that may be having trouble at this point, just try and have a discussion with your representative. I know it sounds silly, but in some cases they don't even know, and from a local standpoint you can kind of educate them. We want to be leaders and pioneers in this space. We want to make sure that people understand that there is no psychoactive behavior here, and it's actually people like Mitch McConnell and other people that understand that this is a money-making endeavor as well, and it can help bring farming back to America in a way that it used to kind of be. This is sort of that perfect harmony where business and medicine and public health and education can all kind of meet together here with the future support of CBD. So yeah, that's kind of it for today. If you guys want to stay after for a little bit, you guys can ask me specific questions. But I do want to go over what we're going to do on the next webinar. I'm going to do it with Adam, who is our social media guru here. He's our marketing director here at the corporate office, and we're going to go over Facebook and Instagram, and we're going to talk about social media posts and then kind of what we think we can do to help you guys post better, and then give some good examples and maybe some not so good examples. And then we're going to also show you, hopefully, our resource center where you can pull from different posts or different pictures and images that we've already created for you that you can pick and choose from. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you guys have any questions or anything specific you'd like to ask and have it included in the next webinar, feel free to message me on WhatsApp, and I can definitely get you whatever you need for that and have it included so everyone can see the same answer to the question.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Adam. So yeah, we're going to be going through that together, and we're going to try and discuss like how to answer posts in a timely manner and all that stuff, and emails to customers. Okay, so the other thing that we wanted to do is try and cultivate emails from your customers. So when they're asking for a receipt, tell them that it would be preferred if we could email them, and then in the future what they could get is some good deals, and hopefully we'll be sending out newsletters soon for like information, and then also, like I said, just sales and stuff like that. So it's a great way to engage with customers after the fact and get them returning back to the store. So if you guys can remember that when you're doing receipts, to make sure that you push the emails to over the cell phone and over the printing of it. So next week, the The other thing that we wanted to do is try and get any employees that you wanted to get signed up for the webinar. If you can WhatsApp me directly, Adam and I can put that into a group, and then we can get more of the employees. Because we went to the Bradenton store this week to film a news interview, and we had a great time talking with the employees there, but we definitely noticed that they were just looking for more and more information. So if we can just help everyone get up to the sort of technical level that we want, and these webinars are a great spot for that, to engage in sort of complicated ideas about CBD and other things like that. And then we were thinking about if anybody has any suggestions. We're looking for a new sort of mode of communication that isn't WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is, kind of always on. If you guys know any sort of messaging services that we could have, where you could have like selected groups able to communicate at certain times. I will hopefully be going over some new product formulations that we're doing. Pretty exciting stuff. There are terpenes that we're adding to it. There's enzymes that we're adding to it. We're adding chamomile in certain situations to try and get a natural, targeted solution that utilizes CBD. So I'm kind of going to be testing that stuff out hopefully this week, and hopefully getting some marketing materials out to you guys and some store inserts that work with this. The other thing that we're working on is lot number traceability. So every single tincture that any new full spec tincture that you get, you should notice a lot number on there, which will be tied to a QR code, which will then show the chemical testing. So these are all things that we're working on in the pipeline. Again, I've had a number of you reach out to me, and I really have appreciated the conversations I've had with you guys. It's been really in depth, so I'm excited that you guys are so engaged in the science realm already. So keep reaching out to me, and I had a great time at Bradenton meeting with employees and seeing customers again. It's always refreshing to see customers too. So if you guys want us to come into a store location, basically Adam and I could get a lot of shots done, get some, customer testimonials on camera, and then I could also help educate you. So any of those things are within the realm of possibilities. You guys just have to reach out to me and let us know that that's something that you maybe want in the future, so we can plan around it. But that is all. If you guys want to, like I said, you can stay and ask some questions. If not, I'll see you guys next week. So yeah. Hey, how's it going? Okay. Yes. I want to put something together on the intranet with Adam that maybe have a brand stuff on it, some branding things. And I also wanted to specifically try and reference these out to a specific study too, so that those things could be available to anybody that wanted to look into that as well. Because if you notice, these things have, it'll basically describe what's happening, but it won't actually tie it to the study. So I just kind of wanted to clean that up a little bit. But yeah, exactly, yeah. And the World Health Organization document as a whole, like I said, it's a PDF that I have, and I can link that to you guys too. But here's one of them. Like this is actually from the meeting, so you can kind of look over all this stuff. So yeah, I'll put that in the intranet as well as like a branded one with just that table. So I would just reference that it's probably more correct to say the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services owns a patent wherein they state this. You know what I mean? The more information you can say. Instead of just saying it is a neuroprotectant, you could just say the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has a patent that states it is a neuroprotectant for things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and that sort of thing. Yeah, or like it exactly. Yeah, if a customer is saying it, you just reference the customer that's it specifically helped. And then as long as you're transparent about it doesn't work, everyone is slightly different, that sort of thing, and make sure that they're talking to their doctors constantly if they're seeing adverse effects, which they shouldn't, but you still let them know that that's a possibility. Then yeah, you can say those things pretty openly. And we had somebody in Bradenton who had arthritic conditions, and Rachel kind of referenced her, and I thought that was great to say, hey, we had somebody who came in who couldn't move her hands, and then weeks later she came back in and she showed me that she was moving her hands. That's a great way, because that's your product got used, and that was the result, and you can actually use that. So those testimonials are all able to be used.